Welcome to part 4 of our series on basic economics, and this is going to be on price controls. Now, we all want prices to be cheaper because we can afford more stuff. Producers want prices to be higher so that they can make more money selling more stuff. Those are two mutually exclusive interests that clash. Now, we've talked about supply and demand, but with these two interests going against each other, they're both going to want to try to control the prices in their favor. And of course, they're both going to go appeal to the government to do it. We want the prices to come down so we can afford more stuff, so we've got our lobbies. The big corporations have their lobbies because they want prices to be bigger and they want to keep out competition. We want more competition, they want less. The first thing we're going to look at is the concept of price gouging. Now, this is what happens when the consumers see a price of something going way higher than they want and they start complaining. Usually it happens because of a shortage. For example, Hurricane Katrina knocked out a lot of refineries, and that resulted in a shortage of gasoline, and the prices went up. A lot of people started crying price gouging. But what was really happening? Well, what was happening was there was a shortage. Due to a disaster, you have shortages due to other things. What that does is on the supply-demand graph, the gas companies couldn't produce as much gasoline at each price level. So the supply curve gets shifted to the left. That raises prices and lowers quantity. They're selling less gas at a higher price. Some places said that's not right, and they instituted price caps. And we did this in a nationwide level back in the 70s. It was a disaster. Why? Because it forced the price to be set at below the equilibrium. As you can see on the graph, that means that more people were wanting to buy gas than there was available gas. And so what happened was there were these long lines. People were just filling up their cars and boats, and every container they had they could put gas in. And they were filling up all these things and taking all this gas, and they were hoarding it. And they were actually preventing a lot of people from getting gas who needed it. So that's just one example of a price control and how it can go awry. Another example that we've been talking about is the minimum wage. The supply and demand graph works just the same for the job market as it does for the regular market. In the labor market, it's the workers who make the supply. It's the employers who comprise the demand. The supply curve is upward sloping because more people want a job if it has a higher wage. The demand curve is downward sloping because a firm can hire more people if they don't have to pay individual employees as much. Again, there's an equilibrium quantity, which is the amount of jobs, and there's an equilibrium price, which is the equilibrium wage. Now, what happens when you get a minimum wage? A minimum wage is a price support. If the equilibrium wage is above the minimum wage, there's no effect. It's only if the equilibrium wage is below the minimum wage that the minimum wage policy has any effect at all, and this is the effect it has. It is a price support. It keeps the price above the equilibrium, and what that means is that there is a greater supply, meaning there are a greater number of people wanting a job than there is demand or jobs available. The difference between the two is unemployment. That is the only way this can work out. One of the ways that the economy has of seeking full employment is to allow wages to adjust themselves for what's happening. If economic conditions are such that everyone can't be hired at a certain price level, the market method is to reduce the wage and to allow everyone to have a job. What the minimum wage says is that any worker who cannot demand at least the minimum wage is prohibited by law from having a job. The result is unemployment. The other way the government does this is with interest rates. The Federal Reserve does this all the time, and I've talked about it in other videos. The way they manipulate interest rates is by manipulating the supply of loanable funds. So in the funds market, we have supply and demand as well. The supply is the supply of loanable funds, and the demand is all the people out there who's wanting to borrow. People want to borrow more money at lower interest rates. And yet lenders want to lend out more money at higher interest rates. So again, we have an equilibrium. Instead of running into the disasters that can happen with a price support or a price ceiling, what the Federal Reserve does is they put money into and out of the banking system. So for example, let's say the Federal Reserve wants to inject money into the system. They announce to their member banks that they're selling bonds. The banks buy the bonds from the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve creates the money to cover the bonds. There's more money in the banks to loan out. This increases the supply of loanable funds, decreases the interest rates, and increases the amount of money being loaned out. They can go the other way. They can sell bonds back to the banks. The money they get from the bonds goes out of circulation. So now there's less money in the economy and less money in the banking system. The supply of loanable funds is lower, interest rates go up, and the quantity of money loaned out drops. Of course, this has consequences of its own with inflation and deflation. If you create money, you get inflation. If you take money out, you make deflation. So this comes at the hidden cost of price stability. That's part 4 on price controls. We'll be back for one more part on unemployment.